brand sat on my table for 3 days. A slaver's iron cut from the arm of a caravan raider on our border, and every time I walked past it, the vow I'd made in the golden light shifted in my chest, from something warm to something with edges. My name is Ricard. 2 years ago I died in another world, alone at a desk, and a goddess who owed me a debt sent me here, to a dying frontier barony, with one gift. Any contract I sign cannot be broken. Fate itself enforces my signature. I had used it to feed a village and unmake a scheming stepmother. Somewhere out in the winter dark, someone was using irons on human beings. I called the household to the hall on the third night. My father at the head of the table, the old war hero with his purpose newly back from the dead. Kali with her needlework untouched in her lap, which meant she was thinking. Camel with her glasses up in her hair and the ledgers already open. Dane standing because Dane always stands, as if sitting were something that happened to other people. I put the brand in the middle of the table and asked the only question that mattered. What does Ashvale do about this? My father said we were 50 soldiers guarding a soap fortune, and every sword we sent chasing raiders was a sword gone from the gate. He wasn't wrong. Kali said the raiders were somebody's raiders, that iron that well-forged had a lord's coin behind it somewhere, and we should learn whose before we swung at anything. She wasn't wrong either. Then Camel turned the ledger around to face me. She'd already run the numbers on what I hadn't dared say out loud. Feeding a stranger costs 4 coppers a day, she said. A working, contracted citizen returns 11. Take them all in, my wife said, tapping the page. Mercy runs at a profit, I've checked. So I signed standing orders that week and posted them on the village well, where every promise I've ever kept lives in plain view. Any soul who reaches Ashvale's gate fleeing anything gets food before questions, always, a bed, and a contract read aloud every clause that turns a stranger into one of ours. Dane doubled the patrols without being asked and pushed them a valley wider. Marin read the orders twice, arms folded, unimpressed as a mountain. And when the raiders follow them here, my lord, I looked at the brand, then they'll learn what happens to men who make me read fine print written in iron. She counted the granary twice that week anyway. Honestly, so did I. The first wagon came in before the thaw finished. 9 people Dane's patrol had cut loose from a raider camp 2 valleys over. They came through our gate at dusk, hollow-eyed, wrapped in whatever the soldiers could spare, flinching at every voice, and the whole village came out quietly to watch, because everyone in Ashvale knows what arriving with nothing feels like. Iska came out with the stew pot. Iska, who had reached that same gate a year ago with a burned scar and one word: food before questions. She fed all 9 with her own hands. Then she sat down on the grain barrel with a page in the torchlight and read them their contracts aloud. Slowly. Every clause, work if you choose it. Wages posted publicly, same as anyone, a roof. The Lord's protection in writing, leave whenever you wish, owing nothing. The oldest of them, a gray man with rope scars on both wrists, made her read the leaving clause 3 times and then wept into his hands because no one had ever offered him a door that opened from the inside. They signed. The ink shimmered blue 9 times. There was a girl among them, 6 years old, maybe 7, who wouldn't speak. She watched me across the yard for a week the way small animals watch weather, and then one market morning she simply attached herself to my leg, arms around my knee, and would not be moved. I stood very still in the middle of the square. Another hallway, another world, another child of about that size, holding on exactly like that. Some debts follow you between lives. I put my hand on her head and let her hold on as long as she wanted. Her mother finally peeled her off with apologies. I turned away so no one would see my face, and Seraphi, who sees everything, tactfully said nothing at all. Within a month the 9 were 20. Within 3, the 20 were 50, because word travels between desperate people faster than any courier rides. Ding. The blue box kept a running tally of contracts like a proud grandmother. Seraphi had begun sorting my agreements into glowing folders. She claimed it was for my administrative benefit. I believe she simply liked watching the number climb, and I understand completely, because so did I. The new arrivals didn't just fill houses. They filled gaps we hadn't known were gaps. The gray man with the rope scars turned out to be a master cooper, and inside a month he had a workshop, 2 apprentices, and opinions about our barrel quality that Grum pretended to resent. A widow from the burned valleys took over the school bench by the well and taught letters to a crowd that got bigger every week, half of it children, half of it grown folk who sat at the back pretending to supervise. And on the first payday, I watched a freed woman hold her posted wages up against the posted rate, checking because she could check, because the number was public. She caught me watching and lifted her chin. That is what I'm building, a place where the numbers survive being checked. Sam appeared at the drill yard on a gray morning with his jaw set like a man attending his own hanging. The blacksmith's son, my old bully, who had shoved me into the mud and sworn he'd never take orders from a corpse. He didn't apologize. Sam doesn't apologize. He picked up a spear, glared at me across the frost, and announced to nobody in particular that if raiders were coming, somebody with real arms ought to hold something sharp. Behind him, in the smithy doorway, Grum watched his son volunteer and hammered the anvil once, softly, like a bell. Dane worked him until he was sick behind the armory. Sam came back the next morning. Dane worked him harder. He came back again. On the 4th day, Dane knocked him flat with a wooden sword, stood over him, and told him he was too angry to fight properly. Sam lay there in the mud, breathing, and then said the first intelligent thing I ever heard him say. "Then teach me the other way." My father, watching from the wall, made a low sound of approval that he would deny under oath. He was, and it caused me physical pain to admit this, good. Strong as his father's anvil, tireless, and the other militia lads followed him without being told to. Dane began handing him the hopeless recruits, the scared plowboys and the shaking new arrivals, and Sam, the bully, turned out to have a gift for making frightened boys feel dangerous. He still called me the corpse when he thought I couldn't hear. I still signed his wages personally. We understood each other perfectly. I walked a night rotation with Sam once, because a lord should know what his walls feel like at third bell. He had a new recruit with him, a freed boy of maybe 16 who jumped at owl sounds, and I watched Sam handle him. No mockery. He gave the boy the lantern, put him on the inside track, and talked the whole circuit in a low voice about nothing, whether boots, the correct way to hate porridge, until the kid's shoulders came down off his ears. At the gate he clapped him once on the back and told him he'd done well. Then Sam saw me watching and scowled like I'd caught him stealing. "Tell anyone," he said, "and I'll say the corpse dreamed it." Spring meant planting, and planting meant my next purchase from the shop between worlds. Crop rotation. Legumes. Knowledge so boring it took me 2 full evenings of chalk diagrams in the hall to convince 100 farmers I hadn't been possessed by a vegetable spirit. The old men muttered about their grandfather's ways. Then Pell stood up at the back, Pell of the full granary, and said his grandfather had starved twice, and he'd take the young lord's beans. That ended the debate. Pell squinted at my rotation chart like a treasure map, and planted his strips exactly as drawn, and where the soil had been coughing dust, rows of green came up like a promise being kept. Meanwhile the soap paid for everything. Ashvale White rolled out of the gate 3 wagons at a time now and rolled home as silver. We graded and stoned the road to the crossing, which halved the journey and doubled the loads. A second soapworks shed went up, and Iska ran both without ever raising her voice, which somehow made her twice as obeyed. The strong room got a second lock, then a proper iron door, then a permanent guard named Hob, whose entire professional duty was grinning at the weight of the chests as they went past. Growth has paperwork, and I say that with love. Every new family meant housing, so roof beams went up weekly to the same ragged cheer. Marin governed the housing list with a fist of iron and a memory that frightens me professionally, and every single arrangement crossed my desk on parchment because everyone was real to the blessing. Wages, roofs, apprenticeships, protection. Each signature another thread of fate wrapped quietly around my little barony. My evenings became a queue of ink and candlelight. I have never in 2 lives been happier at a desk. That spring I also attempted my finest exploit to date, and I wanted on the record that it nearly worked. A shepherd up the valley complained that rain always caught his shearing, so I drafted a contract in which he promised me, formally on parchment, 1 dry shearing week. If the terms could not fail, I reasoned, then the weather itself would have to cooperate. Fate would be legally obligated to arrange sunshine. Seraph's box appeared while the ink was still wet. "The contract binds the parties," she said with the patience of erosion. "The shepherd has promised you a dry week. The shepherd does not control the sky. Fate will therefore help him fulfill his promise by the available means." The available means turned out to be the shepherd, panicking, shearing every sheep he owned 3 days early in one heroic sleepless night before the clouds arrived. Technically, the contract completed. Technically, I am a genius. The shepherd tells the story differently. I did, for the record, still try to cheat. One night I drafted a single master contract with 400 signature lines, the entire barony on one glorious page. One document, one gigantic payout. I was actually giggling when the blue box unfolded. "Technically," Seraphy said, in the tone of a teacher watching her best student eat glue again, "that is permitted. It would also pay as one contract. One. Singular. Total." I fed my masterpiece to the candle while she watched with the serene expression of an angel who is absolutely not gloating. She is not a very good angel. She is the best one. The merchant came in the first week of summer, the way rich men arrive, in a plain coat that cost more than a horse, with a better wagon behind him and eyes that had counted everything in my yard twice before he'd finished dismounting. Toburn, a master trader from 3 towns east, following the rumor of a frontier soap outselling city goods in city markets. He toured the soapworks uninvited until Iska planted herself in his path with a stirring paddle held like a halberd, and he apologized so smoothly she let him live. He tasted our preserved meats with a professional's frown. He lathered Ashvale white over his hands and inspected them like a jeweler grading stones. Then he asked who set our prices. I said I did. He smiled the way a fisherman smiles at a promising stretch of river, and I smiled the same way back, because so did I. He had brought his daughter, and I want to describe my first sight of Lori properly, because I remember it in unfair detail. The manor kitchen, mid-afternoon, flower hanging gold in the window light. A young woman with blonde hair tied in a high bun, freckles, sleeves rolled to the elbow, an apron over a cream dress, who had talked her way past Collie's kitchen sentries in under an hour and was retasting our entire winter stock, rearranging it by what it could become instead of what it was. She pointed a wooden spoon at me the way judges point gavels. "Your smoked fish is good," she said. "Your seasoning is a war crime. Who cooks for you?" I have faced down tribunals, barons, an assassin, and one actual goddess. I stood in my own kitchen and surrendered unconditionally. She cooked that night, commandeering my kitchen staff like a general commandeers a bridge. I will not insult the meal by describing it. I will only say that the hall went quiet, 200 people having a private moment with a bowl, and that Dane, a man who once ate the same porridge for 11 consecutive years on campaign, closed his eyes over the stew like a man remembering something that never happened to him. Toburn watched the faces down the table the way I read contracts. By the second course, he and I both knew there was going to be a partnership. Laurie sent out a 4th course just to be sure. We drafted it after dinner, Toburn and I, with Camel across the table checking every figure, glasses sliding down her nose, mercilessly striking 2 clauses she deemed insufficiently favorable. Investment, warehousing, and Toburn's caravan network carrying Ashvale goods east in exchange for a stake he described as generous, and Camel renegotiated twice. He read the final terms 3 times, chuckled once at something in the wording, and said, "Your wife bargains like my grandmother, boy." "It's the finest compliment I own," he signed. The ink shimmered blue. Ding, contract complete. 20 skill points. 20 now because my birthday had come and gone with the planting, quiet and warm, 1 more year, 1 more point per signature. The goddess's cruelest, kindest joke still compounding annually. With Toburn's silver came my favorite purchase yet, distillation. The shop sold me the theory at a karma discount, and Grum built the copper still to my diagrams while insulting every one of them fluently. The first batch of spirit came off the pipe smelling like victory and paint thinner. The second stripped a spoon. Dane volunteered as taster with a speed I found suspicious, and on the fifth batch he went very quiet, looked into the cup, and then looked at me the way soldiers look at reinforcements. Laurie named it, turning the glass against the hearthlight until it glowed. Ashvale amber. By autumn there were barrels of it aging in the cellar and traders who would eventually ride a week out of their way for it. Soap washes silver in. Amber pours it. Laurie took over the feeding of Ashvale the way Iska had taken the soap benches, sideways, naturally, without anyone ever voting on it. She turned my half-remembered recipes from another world into real food. Dumplings that made Marin, who does not close her eyes for anything, close her eyes. A traveler's stew she could hold at perfect readiness for 100 without waste, which Camel audited in disbelief. Then she turned the food into an industry. A proper kitchen rose beside the hall, chimney fittings forged by Grum, long benches, long tables. The frontier's first true restaurant, feeding travelers at midday and the village on feast nights, and every merchant who ate there once somehow ordered goods from us forever after. Camel called it the tastiest ledger entry in Corving, and she does not spend compliments idly. The restaurant's first true feast night deserves its own telling. Midwinter's Eve, every bench full, the new chimney roaring and Laurie running the kitchen like a battle she'd already won. Course after course of things this frontier had no names for yet, and between them, the room getting louder and warmer until strangers were toasting each other's harvests. Dane stood up somewhere past the third pour of amber. Dane, who does not give speeches, lifted his cup at Laurie through the serving hatch and said 5 words. 11 years of camp porridge. Then he sat down. She came out with flour still on her forearms and kissed the top of his grizzled head, and the hall roared, and my captain went the color of a signal fire and reviewed the exits. The two of them circled each other for a month like polite duelists, the lady of the ledgers and the queen of the kitchen, competing with perfect courtesy over my schedule, my opinions, and the correct method of pantry inventory. I stayed out of it because I am a coward but a strategic one. It ended the way it was always going to end. Laurie began bribing Camel with pastries during audit season, openly, shamelessly, at her desk. Camel began balancing the restaurant's books unasked, at midnight for pleasure. I found them together over the autumn accounts with 3 candles and a plate of tarts, giggling, actually giggling about margins. I stood in the doorway unnoticed and understood with a small shiver that nothing in this barony was truly mine anymore. It was ours. The house was building itself now. A small thing from that autumn which I include because I remember it too well. Toburn's clerk, a neat, quiet man named Odo, sat in the corner of our counting room for a week, copying shipping manifests for his master's records. Meticulous fellow. Gray clothes, good hand, wrote everything down. Everything. I signed his lodging papers myself and thought no more about him than a man thinks about furniture. Remember that I told you this. Laurie and I fell into step without either of us announcing it. She fed me at midnight when I worked late, and insulted my palate while she watched me eat. I read her the absurd clauses out of ancient trade charters until she laughed so hard she had to sit down on the flour sacks. She learned about the ink. You should know that I keep my squid ink split across 3 locked chests in 3 rooms, because an empire built on contracts lives and dies by its stationery. And yes, I know exactly how that sounds, and no, I will not be reasoned with. Laurie said nothing when she found out. But a month later in her pantry I found a shelf of little jars labeled fish sauce that did not contain fish sauce. Backup ink. Hidden in her inventory, unasked, in case my 3 chests burned. I stood there holding a jar of counterfeit fish sauce and felt my whole chest do something complicated and permanent. It isn't roses. It was so much better than roses. Laurie and I had our own rituals by then. She'd started blindfold testing new dishes on me at the counter after closing, on the theory that my palate needed remedial education and my honesty needed supervising. I guessed wrong constantly and on purpose because being corrected by her, spoon in hand, eyes bright, freckles furious, was the best part of my week. On market days we walked the stalls together and she taught me to read a town the way I read a contract, in the produce, in the prices, in which children looked fed. I thought I was clever before I met these women. I have since revised the filing. I'm the least clever person in my own house, and it is the finest arrangement I have ever negotiated. Then the letter came, and it wore a very fine seal. The Merchant Guild of Fairwater, the trade town 3 days east, summoning Toburn before a tribunal, unlicensed trade, breach of guild monopoly, falsified weights, lies, all three stacked and sealed by men whose true complaint was that Ashvale goods were outselling theirs in their own square, and Toburn was the artery carrying them. Guild law let them strip a convicted merchant of everything: wagons, warehouses, license, name. Laurie read it and went white. Toburn aged 5 years at his own table, because he had watched the guild do this to other men and knew exactly how the play ended. And I felt something wake up in me that had been asleep since another life. I took the summons from Laurie's hands and read it the way I used to read deportation orders, and the old cold clarity came up my spine like a friend I hadn't seen in years. Collie watched my face change and began, quietly, to smile. "Pack for Fairwater," I told the table. "All of us. And Camel, my love, bring the abacus. The big one." I was already drafting before the wagon was hitched. Understand what a guild tribunal is on the frontier, not a court. A room the accusers own, where the judges are the plaintiff's business partners, and the verdict was agreed over dinner the night before. Fairwater knew Toburn was finished. The guild master, a velvet mountain named Corvus, had already inquired considerately about purchasing Toburn's warehouses. Cheaply. We rolled into a town that would not meet our eyes. Shop fronts closed as we passed. And the guild hall was packed to the rafters, because a public gutting is the frontier's second favorite theater, and everyone loves a show where the ending's already been paid for. The night before, in the inn, we prepared my way. Camel worked damages calculations by candlelight until the abacus sounded like rain on a roof. Laurie fed us and threatened, seriously, to poison the guild's luncheon, and had to be talked down to merely catering it better than they'd ever eaten so the irony would hurt. And I sat with the guild's founding charter, which I had sent for by fast rider a week before, and read all 90 pages, twice, the way a locksmith reads a lock. Somewhere past midnight I found it, Article 9. I put the charter down and slept like a man with a terrible secret, which I was. The tribunal opened with all the pageantry of a hanging. Corvus presiding in guild velvet, 3 judges beside him with the alert expressions of men whose dinner he'd bought, and the seized scale sitting on the evidence table like a murder weapon. Toburn's shoulders were stone. I took my seat as his advocate, stacked my parchment in perfect silence, and smiled at the bench until it became unsettling. The clerk read the charges. Falsified weights first, their strongest lie, complete with a sworn witness. I let them perform all of it. Every advocate in my old world learns this first. Let the other side finish building the tower before you show them it's standing on your foot. Then I asked my one question about the scale. Whose seal certified it? Silence. Then checking. Then the answer the whole room heard land. The guild's own inspection seal dated that spring, signed by an inspector on Corvus's payroll. I walked the bench through the arithmetic gently, the way you'd help a child across ice. Either the scale was true when the guild sealed it, and therefore true now, and the charge collapses. Or the guild's seals mean nothing, in which case every merchant in this hall trades on worthless certification, and the guild owes the crown 5 years of fraudulent stamp fees, which Camel had happened to total. She held up the figure. A merchant behind me did the sum aloud and swore with real feeling. The tower wobbled. The monopoly charge came next, so I read them their own charter, aloud, with feeling, including Article 9, the clause their own founders wrote 2 generations ago to lure frontier trade to a young town, exempting all goods produced beyond the river line from guild monopoly. Entirely. Forever. Ashvale, as I invited the bench to confirm on their own map, sits beyond the river line. Every crate of soap, every barrel of amber exempt by the founder's own ink. I read it twice, clause by patient clause, in the flat courtroom voice I once used on governments, and watched Corvus's face proceed from wine to rose to chalk. The crowd had stopped being an audience. You could feel it happen. 300 people quietly becoming witnesses. Then I closed my hand because I am my blessing student before I am anything else. I produced the countersuit, drafted in advance on good parchment in better ink, malicious prosecution, tortious interference with lawful trade, and my personal favorite, defamation of a licensed trading house, damages itemized by camel to a figure that made all three judges flinch in unison like a rehearsed chorus. And in the same breath I offered settlement. Withdraw every charge. Refund Toburn's costs. And sign a trade accord granting Ashvale Goods Guild equal standing in Fairwater's market permanently. Or proceed to verdict, and I would carry the countersuit, Article 9 and the matter of the seals to the Crown Circuit Judge, whose incorruptibility I noted was famous, and whose schedule I noted further, I had already inquired after. I laid the pen on the table between us, and I waited. Corvus looked at the pen, at his judges who had discovered urgent interests in the sealing, at the crowd of his own guildsmen doing arithmetic about seals and stamp fees with their lips moving. Then he reached out with a hand that wanted very much to be somewhere else and signed. The hall made a sound I will keep forever, half gasp, half laugh, all story being born. Ding. Contract complete. The chime rang over the whole ridiculous scene like a festival bell only I could hear. Toburn stood very slowly, straightened his fine coat, and bowed to the bench with a courtesy sharper than any insult I have ever drafted. We rode home to a hero's welcome that embarrassed Toburn and delighted Laurie, who performed the entire tribunal at dinner with impressions, including one of me that was, I am told by traitors I married, devastatingly accurate. The Fairwater Accord turned a rival town into a customer overnight. Our wagons rolled east unmolested. And Corvus, to his limited credit, paid every copper on schedule, because somewhere between the seals and Article 9 he had developed a superstition about my signature. Men like him usually do, eventually. I've stopped correcting them. Fear of paper is just literacy arriving late. A week later, at the restaurant's long table, a wine merchant from the East mentioned something between courses that I have thought about every day since. Corvus had been desperate for a verdict, he said, because Corvus himself was squeezed, in debt, to buyers from across the border, from Vera. First time I ever heard the name said plainly. A kingdom west of everything, the merchant said, lowering his voice without noticing he'd done it, where the new king had ways of collecting. The table talk moved on to grape harvests. The word stayed in my ear like a splinter. Vera, west, patient. I filed it the way you file a clause you don't understand yet, and clauses you don't understand are the ones that cost you. Camel, meanwhile, had accidentally invented an intelligence service. Her debentry ledgers had made Ashvale's accounts so clean that Hertz asked to borrow the method. Then Wick. Then merchants we'd never met. And by autumn she was training visiting clerks at a long table in the counting room, 2 silver a head waiting list. Every clerk went home with clean books and left behind, without ever knowing it, a perfect picture of his master's finances, because you cannot teach a man to balance his ledger without seeing what's in it. My wife charges people to show her their secrets. I married so far above my station it isn't visible from here. The raids crept closer all that season, and they stopped being stories. A homestead 2 valleys east burned to its footings. I rode out with Dane to see it, and what I remember is not the char but the order of it. Gates open, not smashed. Wagon ruts in a neat column. Nothing looted that wasn't people. The survivors who reached our gate that month all said the same things through Iska's stew. Riders in matched harness, too disciplined for bandits. Officers with lists. They worked from lists, names and ages like men taking delivery. And on the captain's cloak a pin, a lion's head in dark iron. One survivor I need to tell you about. A boy of 12 reached our gate alone that month, feet wrapped in rags, having walked 4 days on a story his mother told him before the Raiders' column took her the other way. That in the valley with the white soap banners, there was a lord whose paper meant what it said. He recited it at the gate like a prayer he didn't believe anymore. Iska fed him first, the way we do. Then, because our rolls are posted publicly and our freed folk write letters up and down the frontier, it took Marin's network 11 days to find where that column had sold its taking. I wrote 3 letters and spent 40 gold, and his mother walked through our gate before the first snow. I got 20 skill points for the purchase contract. I would have paid the 40 gold 1,000 times over, and Seraphy, for once, put no number on any of it. She just glowed a little warmer that night. Dane set the pinned description on my table next to the brand, and Kali, who knows every crest on this frontier the way camel knows a balance column, named it in one breath and sat down as she did it. House Lionearth, Viscount Jarrick, a rogue noble 2 rivers north, seated in a fortified hold, running slave raids into the border wilds where the crown's writ runs thin, and selling the taken west into Vera, where such commerce is legal, taxed, and hungry. A viscount. 300 armed men in his livery, and the fine legal armor of distance, because the capital is 3 weeks away, and atrocity is quiet when it's rural. Kali laid out the arithmetic at the hearth without mercy because that is her kindness. We could not beat Lionearth in open field. 50 soldiers and a farmer's militia against 300 professionals ends one way, however brave the farmers. And Ashvale had made itself worth raiding. Soap silver, amber barrels, full granaries, and 2,000 people, hundreds of them freed, whom Viscount Jarrick's ledgers would list as escaped inventory. I looked at the map a long time. And for the first time since a dagger came through my bedroom door, I felt genuinely, coldly afraid. Then I did what I have learned to do with fear. I put it in writing. We prepared all winter, and we prepared my way, which means paper first, stone second, iron last. Watchtowers rose on the 3 approach roads, with deep-voiced signal bells cast from our own bronze and tuned by ear until he was satisfied, which took a month and cost him 2 apprentices' nerves. The palisade got stone footings, then stone teeth. Every family got a cellar assignment, every assignment got posted on the well, and the evacuation drills, which the village initially treated as a festival with running, became a religion the day Marin took over the whistle. She got 2,000 people behind walls in 11 minutes. She was furious. She wanted 9. Sam ran the militia's night rotations now. Dane drilled crossbow ranks behind wagon barricades until my farmers could loose, duck, and crank to a drumbeat in the dark, and the observers' other lords sent home wrote reports nobody believed. My father walked the walls every evening with his hands behind his back, correcting a stance here, a torch spacing there, 20 years of war leaking back into the world one quiet suggestion at a time. And I noticed, watching him, that he'd stopped walking like a man waiting for anything. Grief had finally gotten off him. It had taken 19 years and 1 impossible son, and I'd have paid double. Because here was my actual weapon, and it was never going to be the walls. Every lord within 4 days' ride was small like us, scared like us, and alone like us, and alone is the whole trick of a raider's arithmetic. So I rode out that winter with Dane and a strongbox of parchment. Hertz first, my father-in-law in everything but law, who read my mutual defense pact by the fire, grunted at the plain language, and signed with the flourish of a man getting in early on something. Then Baron Wick, a flinty widower whose lands the raiders had already licked at the edges. He was suspicious of everything, especially generosity, so I made Hertz vouch, showed him the accord ledger, and put the leaving clause in front of him first. The door that opens from the inside. Wick read it twice and signed like a man buying armor. Aldering was the hard one. Old blood, older pride, a baron who remembered when Ashvale was a mudhole and did not enjoy needing it. Kali coached me for that hall like a duelist second. Flatter the history, she said. Sell the arithmetic and let him discover the idea was his. So I asked his advice about beacon placement, listened for an hour, adopted 2 suggestions loudly, and by the time the parchment came out, he was explaining my own pact to me with improvements. He signed beneath his crest with a seal older than my house. 4 baronies, 1 lattice of ink, plain terms. If any signatory is attacked, all march. Supplies shared, roads open, beacons answered, and no clause anywhere with teeth hidden in it, because I needed these men to trust the paper the way my villagers trust the well. Each signature chimed in my back teeth. Out beyond the winter dark, fate quietly took sides. When the last pact was sealed, I hosted all 3 lords at Ashvale for a compact dinner, which Kali choreographed down to the seating and Laurie catered into legend. Hertz held court like a proud uncle. Wick inspected our walls before he'd eat, approved of them grimly, and then ate like a man who hadn't approved of anything in years. And old Aldering, 2 cups of amber in, examined his glass against the candlelight and allowed that Ashvale had, quote, come along. From him, that's a parade. The 4 of us signed the beacon protocols after dinner at the long table, 4 seals in a row on 1 page, and I looked at them and thought, there it is. Not walls, that. Paper holding hands. Odo copied the packed ledger that winter along with the manifests. Neat, quiet, thorough Odo in the corner of the counting room, his good gray hand writing everything down for his master's records. Beacon positions, militia counts, wagon schedules. Toburn trusted him with keys. I trusted Toburn. Furniture, I thought, if I thought at all. I am telling you this now so that later you will know exactly how much of it was my fault. In the middle of all that iron and arithmetic, Laurie cornered me. In her kitchen, naturally, doors shut, at the hour of night when the ovens are banked and the room smells like tomorrow's bread. She was holding a parchment of her own, and her chin was up, which is how she looks when she has decided something and pity anyone slow about it. She'd had Camel help her draft it, which explained the flawless clause structure, and also why my first wife had been smirking at me like a card cheat for a solid week. A marriage contract, her terms in a cook's plain hand. She keeps the kitchens forever. She gets my honest opinion of every dish forever, flattery being grounds for annulment, and she gets me forever. The signature line at the bottom was already filled in, hers, bold as brass. You left Camel a blank line and let her choose, she said, while I stood there holding the page like live coals. I watched what that did, so I'm doing it the other way around. I've chosen. The blank line is yours if you want it. There are moments when the lawyer in you simply dies. I read her terms twice because she'd have killed me if I hadn't, and then I signed under her name, and the chime went off like a festival bell. And she kissed me among the banked ovens with flour on her hands, both of us laughing into it, and upstairs, I am reliably informed. Camel heard the commotion, checked the time, and made an entry in the household ledger. It reads in her tidy hand, contract executed. About time. We married in the first snow in the stone hall under the worn banners, and the restaurant catered its own founder's wedding, which Laurie supervised from inside her bridal dress because there are things you do not ask a woman to surrender. Blonde hair down for once, freckles, and a smile that reorganized my entire theology. My father gave the toast, straighter backed every year. Kali wept with commitment and no dignity whatsoever. Toburn cried harder. And Camel, resplendent and smug as the architect of the whole affair, formally presented Laurie with her own page in the household ledger, which in this family is approximately a coronation. The 2 of them clinked cups over it like the conspirators they are. First wife keeps the books. Everyone in this house knows where the power sits, and it is holding an abacus. That night when the door closed on the 2 of us, the box glowed its gentlest blue in the dark. Ding. Bond deepened, +1 XP. Then a moment later a second chime deeper, level UP. The world likes you a little more. Luck permanently increased. Along with a small diplomatic note that Seraphy would be averting her eyes again and wished the household continued prosperity again, and had taken the liberty of muting notifications until morning. For the first time in 2 lifetimes, I fell asleep mid-laugh. One night that winter I found my father in the hall with the locket open, the way I'd found him once before in the hard year. But this time both my wives were with him, and he was telling Paris stories, and they were laughing. Camel had questions because Camel always has questions. Laurie had brought out the good honey cakes because grief eats. I stood in the doorway a while before anyone saw me, watching the mother I never met being introduced to the family she never met, and thought that of all the contracts in this house, the ones nobody ever signed are holding up best of all. Deep winter settled, and my loud, strange, warm house settled with it. Two wives who ran an economy between them and teased me in coordinated shifts. A father-teaching sword forms in the yard to militia boys who had no idea they were being parented. Collie and Marin conducting the town like an orchestra with two conductors and no arguments anyone survived. Some nights I sat at my desk not working, just listening to the noise through the door. In 2 lifetimes, I have owned nothing worth more. Jarek moved at winter's end, exactly as Kali predicted, because inventory does not guard itself and the spring floods would close his selling road to Vera. Our farthest watchtower saw the column at dawn, 2 days out. 300 men in matched harness, supply wagons, and behind them in neat file the empty cage carts, riding light and meant to ride home heavy. The deep bell pattern rolled from tower to tower into the valley, and I stood in the yard and listened to my town not panic. Cellars filled on Marin's schedule. The militia stood their marks with Sam pacing the line, and 3 riders went out on our good stone road, one word under seal to Hertz, to Wick, to Aldering. The word written into all 4 packs: come. And then fate, my oldest business partner, began collecting on a winter of signatures. The river ford on Jarek's March line, frozen solid every year in living memory, broke early that week and ran black and impassable, costing him 3 days and his heaviest wagons. A flux went through his camp, nothing fatal, everything miserable. His forage parties found granaries emptied and wells covered, because our evacuation religion had spread up the valley with the refugees, and villages he'd counted on stripping bare had already carted everything behind our walls. His outriders, sent ahead for the easy names on his lists, met Sam's night patrols in the dark instead and did not report back. Nothing looked like magic. It never looks like magic. It looked like the worst luck any raiding column had ever ridden through, mile after mile, day after sodden day, while his hired captains did quiet arithmetic about wages and his men ate cold porridge in the sleet. On the 6th day, Jarek crested the last hill and got his first look at what his informant's report had not prepared him for. Stone-toothed walls where he'd been promised a palisade. Crossbow ranks steady behind wagon barricades. Watchfires answering down 3 roads. And arriving on the eastern and southern ridges with the dawn behind them, like the punchline of a very long and very patient joke, the massed banners of Hertz, Wick, and Aldering. 4 small baronies stitched into one army by paper. His 300 tired, sick, and 6 weeks unpaid, looking up at better than 500 of hours, warm, fed, and extremely annoyed. Nobody charged. Nobody needed to. From the wall I watched the arithmetic do the fighting, and then I sent down an invitation to parley, worded with terrible courtesy. I did not bring a sword to that tent. I have never once brought a sword. I brought a writing desk and 2 chairs and only needed one. He came in still wearing the lion pin, and opened by negotiating like a man with leverage, which was educational to watch, in the way of watching a man wade into a river that is deeper than he thinks. I let Dane stand behind my chair, saying nothing, being Dane. Then I read aloud from my prepared documents and let the leverage evaporate clause by clause. Sworn testimonies from freed captives, names, dates, villages. The brand, entered as an exhibit, tagged in Camel's neat hand. Route manifests taken from his own captured outriders, and beneath it all the charge that unmakes a noble, spelled out in crown law with citations. Slaving, abolished in Corvin these 40 years, a title-stripping offense upon proof. I tapped the stack. Proof, I said, is the one commodity I never run short of. Then I slid the parchment across. A full confession in his own name, reparations calculated to the copper, every coin owed to the people in his stockades payable through the crown, the immediate release and safe conduct of every captive on his books, dissolution of his raiding companies by name, and at the bottom a signature line witnessed by 4 lords of the Frontier Compact. He read it. He looked at Dane. He looked through the tent flap at the ridges. Then he asked, with the last of his velvet, what would happen if he declined to sign, and my gentle captain answered before I could in the mild voice he saves for the worst things. His men outside were owed 6 weeks' wages, Dane observed, and we had set up a paymaster's table at the edge of camp, settling accounts. No questions asked. Jarek went the color of the sleet outside and picked up my pen and signed. The chime that followed had weight, like a bell rung in a keep. The night the column turned for home, Ashvale did not riot with joy, quite, but it was a near thing. The militia came off the walls to find the restaurant had been cooking for them since noon. Amber went around in cups not entirely regulation size. My father and Wick's old sergeant refought a 20-year-old campaign across a table with forks for cavalry. And I watched Dane and Sam, captain and commander, standing apart from it up on the wall walk, passing 1 cup between them, looking out at the empty hill where 300 men had decided not to die. Neither said a word for an hour. Soldiers have their own contracts. The clauses are all silence, and they hold. The crown did the rest with unseemly relish, because King Aldous' magistrates had wanted Lionhearth for a decade, and I had gift-wrapped him in his own confession with 4 lordly witnesses and page citations. A royal circuit judge stripped the title by midsummer, and I confessed to arranging one small, artisanal cruelty. The official dispatched north to read the stripping decree aloud at Jarek's own gate was a certain smug little tax assessor of our old acquaintance, who I am told performed the reading magnificently, with 2 board escorts and an armful of scrolls, and savored every syllable. The village told that story all year. Some face slaps you deliver in person. The very best ones you deliver by courier with seals. The stockades opened. That is the part I keep. Not the tent, not the pen, not the title. The stockades opening. They came down the north road for a week, 400 and more, thin, rope-marked, branded, some of them carrying children and each other and almost nothing else. And Ashvale did the thing that Ashvale now simply does without orders because it has become who we are. Stew pots to the gate, blankets from every house. And then the grain barrel and the torchlight and Iska's steady voice over the crowd, reading slowly every clause. Work if you choose it. Wages posted where you can check them. A roof. Protection his personally in writing. Leave whenever you wish, owing nothing. The gray man with rope scars stood beside her the whole week, translating for the ones whose voices hadn't come back yet because that is what the freed do here. They hold the door they came through. Name after name went into the rolls in ink that shimmered blue, until Seraphy stopped announcing the contracts individually and simply left the tally glowing in the corner of my eye, climbing like spring floodwater. Somewhere in that week, the little girl who had held my leg walked the new arrivals' children around the square in a solemn line, showing them the well, the school bench, the restaurant window, a 6-year-old conducting orientation. I watched from the steps and did not even try to keep my face in order. The reparations arrived through the crown in iron-bound chests, and we paid them out at a table in the square, Camel presiding with the rolls one by name to the people they were owed. Some of them held the coins a long time without closing their hands. One woman asked Camel 3 times if it was a loan. "It's a debt," my wife told her gently, turning the ledger so she could see her own name in it. "Just not yours, his." And she pointed across the square at nothing in particular, because Jarek wasn't there and never would be again. And the woman looked at the empty air where her fear used to stand and closed her hand on what it owed her. By autumn the census said 2,000, and the word village had quietly stopped fitting. 3 streets with names now. A market square that needed traffic rules, which Marin wrote and enforces with the whistle. A restaurant with a waiting list. A militia other lords send observers to study, and a wall Grum's apprentices give tour of. Pell's rotation fields fed the entire intake wave and had surplus to sell, which he still cannot say out loud without checking the number twice. And in front of the whole drill yard, Dane formally commissioned Sam as militia commander. Sam took the scroll, looked at it, looked at me and said, loud enough for the back ranks, "Not bad for a corpse." I had the scroll framed. Privately, I had the sentence framed too. It hangs where only I can see it, which is to say, everywhere. Tier 3 unlocked. Population 2,000. The shop bloomed open that night like a paper garden, page after new page of knowledge at a karma discount. Roads and bridges. Medicines I recognized and ached over. Machines this century has no business meeting yet. I lay in the dark scrolling with my old addict's eyes while the box patiently dimmed itself around me, and Seraphy cleared her throat once, gently, the way she does when I hover too long over something expensive. Some habits survive death. But the pull is different now. I used to gamble for cards with nobody beside me. Now the couple beside me sleeps and I shop for a town. On the last warm evening of autumn, we ate outside at the long tables. The whole sprawling, ridiculous household, wives and father and captain, Collie and Marin side by side pretending not to run everything, cook fires down the hill, and the town's noise rolling up like a tide I had personally signed into existence. Camel ruled her line under the year's ledger and pronounced us, with professional disgust at her own understatement, solvent. Lori sent so much food to the night watch that guard duty is now a competitive posting. I sat with a cup of our own amber and let myself feel the whole weight of it. The vow from the golden light, further along than I had any right to hope. Not alone. 2,000 strong and not alone. The king's letter came on the first day of true winter. Heavy paper. The royal seal of Corvin. Gold leaf that caught the hearthlight and held it like a small sun on the table. An invitation to court, to the capital, to the marble heart of the kingdom, where His Majesty wished to look upon the frontier baron whose paper had unmade a viscount. The hall crowded in to see it gleam. Collie read it twice over my shoulder, went very still in the way that means her whole mind is moving, and then began immediately to plan, because an invitation like that is a door and a blade in the same envelope, and she has walked through such doors before. I should have felt triumphant. Mostly I felt the splinter turn in my ear. The debt behind Corvus, the buyers behind Jarek. West of everything, patient as winter. Vera. That same night, while my household argued joyfully about court clothes, a thief worked our caravan yard. Hooded quick, moving between the wagons like smoke with manners. Past 2 locks that should have held her. Past a guard who swears on his mother he never blinked. She chose the strongbox on the lead wagon, the one any professional would choose, and her hands were the finest our locks had ever met, and the lid came up without a sound. There was no coin in it. There was a single sheet of parchment. Good stock. Charcoal ink, drafted in a hand she did not know and could never have expected, listing employment, wages, protection, and no questions asked, not one about the past, complete in every clause, save one. The name of the second party had been left blank. Somewhere above the caravan yard, soft as the snow starting to fall, a chime rang. Nobody heard it but me. The contract lord will return.